This is Jamie Dyer welcoming you to another edition of the Quo-Cast. And if you'd like to be a guest on a future edition of the podcast, you can email quocast@outlook.com. That's quocast@outlook.com. You can tweet at the Quocast on Twitter, or go to the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/The Quo-Cast. So just in case you are unaware and wondering why episodes are not being released on a weekly basis, from the beginning of 2022, I made the decision to go to 2 audio episodes a month and up to 2 video episodes a month. So alternate weeks, every couple of weeks or so, a new audio episode. A couple of weeks ago, I had Andy Gamble on the podcast. Thank you so much to Andy for appearing. Thank you for listening as well, because it is one of the most listened to podcasts of the show so far. So let's start the podcast the way that I'm hoping to do each time, with a little brief news segment. So firstly, you will remember that Rhino's Revenge had to cancel their tour for a few reasons, one of them being that Rhino tested positive for COVID-19 in late December and was suffering with fatigue, etc. And then some gigs were booked. There were 3 gigs, one at the Half Moon in Putney, one in Coshalton, and one in Chichester, which a couple of days prior to them happening, it was cancelled due to Rhino still suffering from fatigue, possibly preparing for the upcoming Quo Tour. And of course, Richard Newman tested positive for COVID-19 as well. Jim Kirkpatrick still went along to those venues and played a solo set. The Half Moon Putney actually was the setting for a live recording, so hopefully lots of people went along to that. Well done, Jim, for stepping in and still serving those venues, of which I'm sure Rhino will tell you really need help at this time. So what about Rhino's Revenge? Well, that has been rescheduled for October, and as far as I know, the tickets are transferable. So if you bought a ticket for any of those gigs, you should be able to use them in October. That is what I will be doing. I was disappointed that the main gig was cancelled, but the fact I get to go in October is a good consolation prize indeed. So that is that. Hopefully the members of Rhino's Revenge feel better soon, because obviously in a few weeks' time there is a Quo Tour upcoming, the Out Quoing Tour, which Francis has been promoting somewhat, hasn't he? He went on James Martin's show. What did you make of that? I thought you saw a slightly different side to him, actually, and I felt like James was asking him all the same old questions that you get, and there's nothing really in there for the fans per se, because we've heard it all before. But he seemed to be kind of diverting and talking about the food, right? He was getting asked all these questions, and then he'd ask about the food, and it kind of got into that. And I feel the public perhaps saw a slightly different side. Like, what is Francis like in the kitchen at home? And there were a few jokes about his wife and salt and stuff, which you can expect. It's kind of part of Francis and what he does on shows like that. But I thought you just saw a different side to him, and that was really interesting. What did you think? Do let me know. Now, sadly, this week, the 7th of February, marked the first birthday for Alan Lancaster since he passed away in September last year. He would have been 73, and I saw so many people talking about their experiences with Alan, pictures of people meeting Alan, videos, backwater performances, live performances, literally everything. There was an outpouring of love for Alan Lancaster, which was lovely to see. It's really sad that he's not here to see it, and I do send out my best thoughts and wishes to all of his family, friends, and fans. And one of the roles of this podcast is to celebrate his work, which we will be doing at several points throughout this year, because there are many anniversaries that fall in specific years, and I'm trying to focus on the ones that are kind of 0 and 5. So this year, I hope at some point to talk about the NEC gig in 1982, the one performed in front of royalty, and the subsequent album as well that hit the top spot back in 1982. The album, perhaps, Alan might have wanted to forget about. I believe he once called it one of the worst albums, if not the worst album that they'd ever made. The performance, though, I think he probably was quite proud of. So I do hope to do that. If you were in the audience for that, do get in contact. I feel like I have spoken to somebody who was in the audience for those performances, at least one of those performances. I am going over my archive at the moment, trying to transcribe them to get some of the information from there and bank it and put it onto a website so that people can find it a lot easier. But we will be talking about the NEC gig at some point in the year. So into the main part of the episode, and this week, obviously, because it was the anniversary of Alan's birth, I've been thinking about tracks that he sang on, things like Backwater, Just Take Me, You Don't Own Me, High Flyer, which at times is quite profound. I relate to some of it. Just that whole Whatever You Want album is so relatable, right? Songs like Who Asked You? If I ever got angry, Who Asked You was the track to go to, because fuels the anger, being criticized. Who asked you? There you go again, telling me the same mistakes I made. There you go again, telling me the way I should have played. And it's like that is such a relatable lyric, isn't it? Such a relatable lyric. And it's one I've been thinking about somewhat for a while, because I realized the other day I have been doing this podcast for nearly 3 years, and I cannot believe it. What started as simply I absolutely adore Status Quo. I love their music. I've done every other kind of podcast there is. This one might work or it might flop. And then 6 episodes later, I kind of never looked back, although there was a little break in the middle. But I've been doing this podcast for 3 years, and it is with great honor that and some surprise that this is episode 100-ish. And I say 100-ish because I don't know, because it depends what you count, right? Some of the episodes are under 3 minutes long, and I feel like the ones where it's a trailer telling you what the podcast isn't an episode, and the ones where I'm just taking a break, doesn't feel like an episode either. So if you take those out, we're around 100. And I wanted to take this opportunity on episode 100 to say thank you to those who have supported the podcast for the past 3 years. It is incredible. We've had so many amazing people on this podcast. We've had fans, friends of the band. We had Andy Brook on here a little while ago. John Eden's been on a couple of times. We've had people from tribute bands. Reese from Heavy Traffic springs to mind. Joachim from Sound of Status. Ray from Status Quotes was amazing. I'd love to get him back on, certainly. In fact, no, I'd love to get everybody back on just to kind of talk about different aspects, because that's what I would like to explore, right? I had a lot of people on once, and you go through your standard questions that I have sort of written in my head that I ask everybody, but I feel you could really go deep if you have somebody on again. So if you'd like to come on again and you've already been, please, please do come on and let's chat some more Quo, because there's so much to talk about. We had Rhino on a couple of years ago, which was such an honor, and I was so nervous about that. So nervous that I don't remember half of what happened. I remember sitting there, being there and doing it, but I don't remember sort of the general thing. It's kind of odd. And it's the same thing, I think, with John Coughlin as well. I spoke to him. Again, that was such an honor. These are people I've been following for 25 years now. I'm 32 years old, 33 this year, and I've been following them since 1997. And it's just, it's mind-blowing, right? Knowing that that sort of reclusive child at college and university that was kind of sat in the corner of the cafeteria or whatever you want to call it, listening to If You Can't Stand the Heat. And here I am, sat in front of a monitor, talking to the drummer from that album, or from Never Too Late, or Just Supposing, or Pile Driver, Hello, On the Level, Blue for You. And in Rhino's case, In the Army Now, Ain't Complaining, two albums I absolutely adore for various reasons. Rock Till You Drop, the author of Obstruction Day, John Coughlin, the guy who drummed on I Saw the Light with those really loud, piercing cymbals. Absolutely amazing. And when I think back to how it started, we had people from tribute bands, people who have kept that music going outside of the band. But no, actually, really, it started 11 years ago with Alan Lancaster, funnily enough, doing a charity broadcast completely unrelated to Quo, and deciding I would like a guest. And he'd just gone onto Facebook and messaging him out of nowhere, just saying, I would love to talk to you. And talking to him and being so nervous and having next to no experience of interviewing whatsoever, going on with one of my heroes. And then literally 8 years later, doing a podcast. And one of my regrets is I didn't get in contact with him again for this podcast, because it would have been great to catch up with him. And like I said, that second time, the first time was kind of the interview was for everybody, right? It was for kind of a general audience. This is a lot more in depth. I can ask about that random B-side from 1977, whatever, right? Or I can ask him about Hard Ride or other bits and pieces, or what it was like playing with a member of the Angels, which it would have been great. And I feel really sad that I didn't do that again. This year I am trying to reach out to more people. You saw that at the beginning of the year with Chris Selby from the Slade camp, the Slade historian. He was amazing. It gave a different light, I think, to the Quo stories that we've been hearing, and shows that actually the Quo one is universal, and there's just so much to glean from what I call the Quo universe. And I think one of my most embarrassing moments on this podcast was sometimes I have this thing where I don't word things correctly, and I'm working on it, always working. You never become the ultimate interviewer when you're doing this stuff. You always learn from it. So what happened was I was with Lee O'Brien via Zoom or Skype. It was one of those. And I asked him, and think he's probably not heard the podcast before. He's probably not familiar with any of my terminology. And I asked him, was he familiar with the Quo universe? And I looked at his face and he looked so confused, like, what, status quo? Like, yes, that's what I should have said. The way I worded the question should have been, were you a fan of status quo or something like that? That was probably quite an embarrassing moment. Just wording that incorrectly, that kind of stuck with me somewhat. But the Quo universe is so wide, hugely wide. I've already mentioned that Alan Lancaster played with a member of the Angels, right? So the last week or so, it's been announced that Neighbours is possibly, most likely, going to come to an end after, 37 years of being on the air. Did you know that Neighbours exists in the Quo universe? Neighbours exists. And it exists because Scott and Charlene's wedding in the late 80s, big thing. Pretty much every newspaper that was talking about it, talking about Neighbours, had a picture of Scott and Charlene or Harold or whatever. But Scott and Charlene, their wedding, Angry Anderson, suddenly. Angry Anderson played in The Party Boys in 1986 to 87 with Alan Lancaster. Makes him part of the Quo universe. Makes Neighbours part of the Quo universe as well. It's such a tenuous connection, but it's there. And it means that for a brief moment, we can talk about Suddenly and how it relates to the music that he was playing with the Party Boys, of which Alan was a part of. And that's why sometimes when I've talked about this podcast, they've gone, oh, that's really niche. How many times can you talk about Hello or Pile Driver? It turns out nearly 100 times. But you can go further. What about Andy Bowen's solo efforts? Music by The Herd, music by Pink Floyd, some of which he's had a go in. What about anything Francis Rossi has ever produced, like Lee O'Brien, John Ducan, for example, that appeared on YouTube recently? What about Paul Camilleri, Bernadette, Be in the North? Any children of the Quo fraternity, let's say. What about Rhino's children, the various bands, Flaws? Yeah. What about all of the tribute bands who've ever supported, including Lawrence Jones, who I'm hoping to get on as a guest in the near future, who's supporting Quo on their next tour, hopefully, if it goes ahead. It is so wide, and I've absolutely loved exploring that, because I have been obsessed with Quo since I was like 7 years old, 8 years old, something like that. And the chance to go over that stuff and put that knowledge that you've picked up over the years to good use is just amazing. And I'm always trying to learn more. I've just picked up a secondhand copy of Just for the Record, which is the first autobiography by Rick Parfitt and Francis Rossi. Now, it's certain I've heard nearly every story that's in that book, right? But for me, it was more about what angle was it going to take? For a start, from what I understand, Excess All Areas and the recent Francis Rossi autobiography were both written in conjunction with Mick Wall. This one has two or three different interviewers, which means the wording might be slightly different. Maybe the questions are different. Maybe the answers differ slightly from where they are. After all, if you interview somebody at different times, there's going to be a slight change in the way in which they talk about it, because if it's something from a while ago, a little bit longer forward, and it's even further, so your perspective changes. So that was interesting. That was an interesting prospect for me. And it's something certainly that I look forward to discovering when I read it. I need to get hold of David J. Oxley's book as well, that was released about 23 years ago, that detailed. That should have been called The Quo Universe, shouldn't it? There we go, David. There's your next book, but be sure to credit me. Thank you. So yeah, it's so wide. I've loved exploring it. I can't wait to explore some more for another 100 or more episodes. We've had over 15,000 plays across all platforms. That is including the main audio feed and YouTube as well. Now, it's true that I also do video content, and that counts as plays in my book, because I also do like the interviews in audio form and stuff on there, and haul videos and reviews and everything. I think it all counts. So 15,000 plays across all platforms. I'm incredibly proud. And to think that I'm sure many people would have said to you, as they said to me, well, there's more to life than Status Quo. You'll never get anything going down that rabbit hole. And yet, this is the most niche podcast I've ever done, and it's also the most successful, which is both hilarious, wonderful, everything. It's everything I could have imagined and more. And I will say this again, if you'd like to be a guest on a future episode of the podcast, you can email quocast@outlook.com. That's quocast@outlook.com. You can tweet at the Quocast on Twitter, or go to the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/the Quocast. I am going to go and listen to some Quo now. Please do keep listening. Subscribe on your favorite podcast provider. Spread the word. I'm working on a WordPress website at the moment with some transcription. We'll have to wait and see on that one. Thank you so much for listening, and bye-bye for now.